Hello there. Welcome to another podcast from Bible-Based Podcasts with me, Ron Bailey, from BibleBased.com. This is study number 8 in our Bible-Based Advent Calendar, where we will be doing a countdown to Christmas and a few days beyond with brief Bible studies, usually 15 minutes or so. Yesterday's was a little bit longer than that, but usually around about 15 minutes. You ought to be able to find these studies in all kinds of places, in Bible-based podcasts, BibleBased.com, in a Facebook group, Friends of Bible-Base, as a Bible-Base blog post, and especially at newliferadio.co.uk with Mike Coles, and so I'm told, on Spotify. So we've come to number 8, which I'm calling The Promise of the Servant Ruler. There are two themes that run through the Old Testament. One is sometimes referred to as different threads. You have the purple thread of royalty, the glory, the majesty of the king who is coming. And then you have another thread that entwines with it. It's sometimes called the scarlet thread of suffering. The Messiah who's coming has two aspects. There is the aspect of him being the king, the one who will rule, and we've seen that in the last session. But also there's this other one which speaks of him suffering, and Isaiah, of course, is the best example of this. Isaiah 53, where we see a vivid picture of Calvary that results in him seeing of the travail of his soul and being satisfied, because as he cried, "It is finished," he knew his work was done. Where are we going to start this? Well, let's start with the prophecy of Micah. Let me read a verse to begin with. But this is Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. I'll say a little bit more about Micah in a moment. "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, which art little to be among the thousands of Judah, out of thee shall one come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting." Do you recall the old hymn, "O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie, beneath thy deep and dreamless sleep, the silent stars go by." Disaster and a new beginning. The prophet Micah was a contemporary of Isaiah, and the introduction to his prophecy places him in the same era of the later kings of Judah. The pattern of the book is a number of oracles or words from God, which are gathered into 3 sections. It comes complete with a well-ordered label. 2 good kings of Jotham and Hezekiah stand either side of an evil king, Ahaz. This is Micah chapter 1 and verse 1. It's wonderful how these prophecies are date-stamped so that we can so often put them into a context and begin to understand what this originally meant to the person who said it and to the person who heard it, but also see it in its larger context. So this is Micah chapter 1 and verse 1. "The word of Jehovah that came to Micah the Moreshthite in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem." The dominant doom here is the prediction of the disaster that is to befall the northern kingdom of Israel. Like the prophecies of Isaiah, Micah sees beyond the imminent disaster to a restoration of a believing remnant who will be the carriers of the destiny of the people of God. And the contrast is seen starkly in the first verses of chapter 5. Oh, the love that drew salvation's plan. Micah chapter 5 verses 1 and 2. "Now shalt thou gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, which art little to be among the thousands of Judah, out of thee shall one come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah. The word but introduces an interruption in the general flow or the direction of a sentence. The interruption here introduces the small town, city of Bethlehem Ephratah in the tribal allotment of Judah. The dots are being joined together, and the accumulation of information is now impressive. The seed is promised to Eve, then to Abraham, then to the tribe of Judah, then to David, now to David's own town of Bethlehem. Not just the family, but the family home. More than just a nation's resurgence. At a general level, we might be tempted to think this is just a prophecy indicating that deliverance would come through the Davidic dynasty. But there are implications here which combine with other prophecies to indicate that the label of Israel, which at this time might simply have indicated the northern kingdom, is now being relaunched as the label of a united kingdom under a descendant of David. It had been a united kingdom under David, and now as these prophecies come through of a reunited kingdom, it often uses the language of David's kingdom. This theme would become clear through the revelations of other prophets. This is Ezekiel, for example, chapter 37, verse 22. And I will make them, remember Ezekiel is a captive in the land of Babylon when the northern kingdom has been taken into captivity, and so is the southern kingdom. But he's a promise of a future. And I will make them one nation in the land, upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all, and they shall be no more two nations. This is a key thing about the return from captivity. They will no longer be two nations. Neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will save them out of all their dwelling places, wherein they have sinned, and I will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God. And the next couple of verses make it even more specific. And my servant David shall be king over them. Now remember, David has been dead and buried hundreds of years when Ezekiel gives this promise. And my servant David shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. Listen to the language here. King, shepherd. My servant David shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall also walk in mine ordinances, and observe my statutes, and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers dwelt. And they shall dwell therein, they and their children, and their children's children, forever. And my servant David shall they be their prince forever. Now, what kind of prophecy is this? Of a Davidic king whose reign would be forever. David reigned for 40 years, something like that. That was a long reign in those days. But David, my servant, shall be their prince forever. This can't mean David. It's out of date anyway, because it's hundreds of years later. But who is this that Ezekiel refers to as someone, let's say, put it like this, like David, who united the kingdom under one person? It was their loyalty and commitment to David that brought the people together again. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them, not only peace between the two warring nations of Israel and Judah, but peace between them and God, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will place them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. Now, what kind of promise is this? It's all superlatives. It's absolutes. There's no shading here. It's all absolute transformation. Now, let's go back to that little reference to Micah, where he introduces the theme of one nation, one ruler, one flock. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, I'm reading from the New King James Version here, yet out of you shall come forth to me one to be ruler in Israel. Let's think a little bit about the origins of the deliverer, the one who is going to come to deliver and to be ruler over Israel as God's servant, their prince forever. Back to Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, which art little to be among the thousands of Judah, out of thee shall one come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting. Therefore will he give them up until the time that she who travails has brought forth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return unto the children of Israel. Micah is picking up the theme of a believing remnant from the exiled nations of Israel and Judah. A remnant, a believing remnant will return and will become God's people. The picture is one of someone who stands before Jehovah to receive his commission. How does it go? It says here, out of thee shall come forth one unto me that is to be ruler in Israel. Here he is. He comes into the presence of God for his commission. The picture is of one emerging who stands before Jehovah to receive his commission. He comes to be Jehovah's man. He comes forth to me. He will bear no partiality, but will come as the servant of Jehovah. It brings to mind the Sinai covenant and God's offer that they would be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, singular. He would be the servant of Jehovah in a way that Israel had failed to be, and his origins are beyond the reach of human knowledge or sight. His origins are older than David, older than Abraham. His goings forth are from everlasting. I sometimes imagine these ancient prophets arrested by their own words. Peter tells us that they did not fully comprehend their own utterances. Surely this must have been one such. When Micah had the chance to pause and consider the words of his own mouth, just what did he think about such statements as these? Prophetic scripture sometimes puts me in mind of the aurora borealis, the northern lights, cascades of colour and truth pouring out, shimmering with revelation and impossible at times to pin down. Some aspects are precise and easy of interpretation, others flow in endless combinations of life and truth. Peering through the wonder of these revelations, we touch thrilling concepts of a nation brought forth in one day, a believing remnant restored to God's great plan. We see one who stands and feeds his flock, king, shepherd, deliverer. One shepherd and one flock. Other sheep I have that are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and there will be one shepherd and one flock. That's John chapter 10, a long way in the future, but you can see where it comes from. Micah chapter 5, verses 3 and 4. Therefore will he give them up until the time that she who travails is brought forth. Then the residue, the remnant of his brethren shall return unto the children of Israel, And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of Jehovah. In the majesty of the name of Jehovah, his God, I will declare unto them thy name. I have declared unto them thy name. I will continue to declare unto them thy name, said Jesus in that great prayer of John chapter 17. The Christmas cards and carols try to capture the wonder of it all, don't they? What child is this? Who is he in yonder stall? We have this all-encompassing promise of the servant of Jehovah. Remember, these two threads intertwine constantly. The purple thread of royalty, rule, power, majesty. And this scarlet thread of servanthood that would lead through suffering, to which he committed himself in a baptism by John in the river Jordan, all heading towards an amazing statement in Isaiah 53 and verse 10, where it gives a graphic picture of Calvary and substitutionary atonement. And it says this in Isaiah 53, I'm reading here from verse 10, yet it pleased Jehovah to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Jehovah shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By the knowledge of himself my righteous servant shall justify many, and he shall bear their iniquities. What an amazing prophetic journey this is as it works its way through the Old Testament. Oh, Christmas is wonderful with its fierce concentration on Bethlehem, but that wasn't the beginning of the story. This story started a long time ago, way back with Eve and the promise of a seed who would bruise the serpent's head. It pleased Jehovah to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. And when thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Jehovah shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By the knowledge of himself shall my righteous servant justify many, and he shall bear their iniquities. Well, this podcast brings the first section to a close. We've paused to look more carefully into the wonder of a promise of a Saviour. And that really has taken us from the beginning of these podcasts 1 to 9. We will now move to a group of podcasts that will examine the hopes and fears of all our years as recorded in the anticipation of our Saviour. Here's our roadmap very briefly. The promise of a Saviour from podcasts 1 to 9. Now we're going to move to the anticipation of the Saviour. That'll take us into the next few, from December the 20th to the 23rd. Then on December the 24th to the 28th, we'll focus on the birth of the Saviour. And then towards the end of the year, good time to reflect at the end of the year, reflecting on the Saviour. And that'll give us our last 3. So, are you going to stay the pace? Are you going to stick with us? I do hope you will. And we'd love to hear how you're getting on with this journey. So, please let us know. And even if you can't do that, do come join us again next time. God bless you.